Welcome everyone to the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge, where what we do is have a dialogue, conversations about all things mentoring. I'm Dr. Stephen Hobbs. I'm joined by Doug Lawrence. We'll share a little bit more about who we are and who is the International Mentoring Community. But I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of what it is that we're going to be taking a look at today. And I just want to bring to your attention these key words. This is about mentoring certification, and we'll be taking a look at profile, self-assessment, education, verification, and certification. So we'll be unfolding those words as though we're taking you on down a pathway. We're going for a little walk, and we just want to share with you how you might get your mentoring certification from the International Mentoring Community. So with that, Doug, I think it might be great for us just to introduce who we are. So if you'd like to go first.
I certainly can. I'm Doug Lawrence, and I am the founder of Talent C, People Services Incorporated, and I'm also the co-founder of the International Mentoring Community. And with IMC, or the International Mentoring Community, I am the Director of Practice and Outreach.
Yeah, and I think one of the deep practice members of our community is Doug. I want to acknowledge that. I also would like to put a shout out for him if you're doing mentoring in the workplace or mentoring for the workplace. He's someone to have a conversation. You can link that to organization culture. In and for is particular, and if you want to learn more about that, then Doug is one of the great people to have a chat with there. I am Dr. Stephen Hobbs. I am the Director of Education and Certification for the International Mentoring Community. I'm not so much into the deep practice of what's going on as preparing education material, working on the library, and making sure that the certification program lives up to what it is that we're attempting to do. And as we go through today's presentation, we'll be linking it through a story of the Criminal Code of Canada, the International Standards Organization standards and regulations. We're not going to go into it deep with those two, but we wanted to offer you a little bit of our uniqueness of IMC and what it is that we're doing for the world. And I think that, Doug, that covers it off. Is there anything else that we need to share at this point in time?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so let's get into this. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, as soon as we get everything lined up here, is we're going to take a look at a couple of key concepts associated with mentoring certification. And the first thing off, we need to just alert ourselves, remind ourselves what mentoring is, and then I'm just going to take a look at certification. There's a couple of key concepts I want to go over, but Doug, you want to share IMC's definition of mentoring?
I sure can. So mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where both the mentor and the mentee learn and develop together on a personal and on a professional basis.
So what's the most important aspect of that definition, do you think?
Well,
for our listeners.
Yeah, the big thing is it's two-way. So it takes us, that's part of the paradigm shift that mentoring's gone through from sort of the wise old sage atop the mountain passing on their wisdom and knowledge, saying, this is what I've done, so therefore you should do it, go forth and do, versus making it a collaborative two-way conversation.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important to recognize, okay, that unfolds. And then eventually we encourage that the mentee becomes a mentor, the mentor becomes a mentee, even in that connection, that arrangement. So that's just something else that we would bring to your attention. So we've covered off that aspect. What I'd like to do is just take a look at this notion of mandatory and applicable. People ask us, is certification of me being a mentor mandatory, or to some effect? And one of the ways that we answer that is, we can't say to you it's mandatory against some external criteria that's out there. What we do is we encourage you to think about how certification is applicable to you, and that's why I want to go into the applicability aspect of it. But I just like to acknowledge is that, and really emphasize that it's not mandatory. We certainly encourage the certification of becoming a mentor. I think that we have a great example of that with coaching. There's lots of certification that's going on with coaching at this point in time. Doug and I, from an international mentoring community perspective, we keep looking. We don't find anyone else who's doing the certification for the individual. We see people offering accreditation of their mentoring courses or their company, but we don't necessarily see the full certification of the mentor. So that's what we're leaning into. And with Doug's deep practice in the mental health, I think there's a story unfolding there around this word, the professional aspect of mentoring that we share in our definition. And we're going to be outlining possibilities for you in upcoming videos about this professional status that would lean into this notion of mandatory. But there's no one at this point in time saying, yes, it is mandatory. The other part I'd like to get into, applicable. It's in what way is it, have application, certifying you as a mentor? Well, this is how I look at it, and I'm going to ask Doug to offer his perspective as well, is that if you're new to mentoring and you're just getting yourself going, then going through a certification of what it means to mentor and to be involved in the process of mentoring, I suggest it is a great way to ground yourself, to get that foundation, that seed bed up and operating for you. But I'd also offer to you is that if you have been mentoring for a little while and you want to do some continuous learning, the certification process is really great from that continuous learning, continuous development perspective. And the third thing that I would offer is, Doug and I are committed to sharing with you this all things mentoring story and products and processes, because we believe that there is a real need for mentoring, and to be certified to lean into that story plays itself out in some really great ways. And I know Doug has a really wonderful story about why certification and the work that he does, and I'll let him share that with you now.
So the what had happened to me was I was actually interviewed, and it happened a couple times, but I was being interviewed by a prospective client who had said, so tell us why we should hire you as a mentor. And my response to that was, well, I have all this experience. And they said, yeah, and so do a lot of other people. And I said, but I'm also certified. I'm certified by the international mentoring community against a criteria. And I walked them through an understanding of that process. And at the end of the conversation, they said, when can you start? So it does have significance and meaning, especially for those who are looking at it from a deep practice perspective, that being certified competent as a mentor has a lot of value to it in that regard. The other part, and you already touched on this, is the fact that even if you're just a new person getting started in the mentoring world, any sort of training that you can get so that you have a better understanding of the process and concepts that are around, being an effective mentor is steps in or are steps in the right direction.
For sure. And I think the other component of this applicability is in the title. While it's international, I believe everyone gets a sense of that because we're attempting to do this around the world, mentoring. But it's also, the certification is about growing the community, and to Doug's point, really deepen, enrich this practice of mentoring and how we can learn together through the community to get out there and touch the commons, if you would think of it that way. Because unfortunately, there are still people who are using mentoring incorrectly, and they're overlapping it with coaching and saying, well, it's all the same thing. And we're going, if we could, we would hit that button and say, no, let's regroup. Let's take a look at this. So that's why we're doing what it is that we're doing. And thanks for sharing that story. So appreciate it, Doug. So the thing that I just want to bring us back to alert us is that we're going through these 5 components, 5 pillars, 5 tenets, essentials, however you'd like to take a look at it. So we're going to be taking a look at the notion of the profile and how we created it using action outcome. Then we're going to talk about self-assessment as a way in which to look at the creating of a benchmark, a touchstone to move things forward. And I'm going to get Doug certainly talking a little bit more about his experience, because I said to Doug some time back, I said, listen, if we're going to do this, one of us has to experience it as we're doing it. Doug said, I'll do it. I said, great. Then that way I can lean into the verification system and make sure that we're doing it correctly. And so I'm going to be tapping into his experience around what happened as he went through this. So that's 1 and 2. So the profile, the self-assessment. The next thing is the education, filling in the gaps, right, between your touchstone and the notion of being able to fulfill the profile. And then there's the story of verification and what does that mean? And we'll also share a little bit about auditing and why that's important, because that'll come to the world of certification, because we have 3 certifications we work with, and then we have a 4th one certainly coming into its own, and it will be contributing a lot for the world. But to get us started in this, then I think what would be helpful is to take a look at this first. And I just wanted to use these sort of 5 C's, all right, here, as a way for some who want to just sort of say, is there a quick way to remember this and to move forward? So I'm just going to offer you is that obviously as you connect with us and start working with the profile, then you can start to consider your self-assessment and what does that mean for you, so that what you can do is convert through education, filling in the gaps, then allows you to conclude, oh, I think I've got enough to allow me to go through the verification process. So what I can do is actually complete this pathway and get my certification out the other end. What we have found over time is that often what happens is that people get into about this area here, and then they do not, for some reason, all right, complete the task. And we know this from other courses that people do, and we talk to them, and not necessarily about mentoring, it could be about coaching. There's a lot of people who start up, get it going, but they don't necessarily keep it going, supporting it, and then scaling it up. And so one of the things that Doug and I are committed to doing is making sure that every person who gets involved with what we do, they complete it. You get your certification, we get you up, and we get you moving forward. That's one of our commitments to what's happening. Anything you want to add about these 5 C's, Doug?
No, they make sense, the logical sense as to the journey that one must go through in order to to get to the end.
Yep. So let's get into the story of what it is that we want to share with you. And we're going to start with profile. Now, the profile is a way for us to collect together what some people might call the criteria. If I'm going to be certified, I'm going to be certified against some kind of criteria. Another word that people might use is competencies. We actually use the word action outcomes because we think it's more descriptive and explains more about what we do. So from an action outcome point of view, we would say, okay, the action is the action verb. The outcome is that noun phrase that goes with it. Let me give you an example. Demonstrate ethical decision making. The demonstrate is the action verb, and the ethical decision making is the outcome. So the demonstrate, to show that you can actually do it, and it's about ethical decision making. So making ethical decisions, making decisions that are ethical, and being able to track that story, track the process about how you go about doing that. That's one example. So within the profile that we have 79 action outcome statements that we have brought forward. And the idea here is that we took a look at different organizations who are offering courses and saying, these are the competencies or these are the criteria that you need to be a good mentor. So we collected those together and actually created the profile. So at last count, and we keep doing it and keep checking, is that we've used 15 other lists and being able to sort of condense it down and put it into the action outcome statements that we actually work with. So there are what we call the concept action outcomes, and there are the practice action outcomes. And to give you a bit of a difference, a concept one would be define mentoring. All right. The one that we would use for a practice might be is demonstrate the development or demonstrate the creation of the arrangement that you're going to use for mentoring. And the other part that I would just make mention here, and I think that this is something that's really important and sort of has us stand out, is that we worked this profile, these action outcomes, back against the Criminal Code of Canada, 217.1, which basically states is that if you are a manager, and this comes from an environmental, occupational health and safety perspective, if you're a manager and you are providing the necessary training for an employee to do the job, then you must do it so that that employee is competent in what they're doing before you let them loose. But also is that if you don't do that appropriate training, you could find yourself in trouble if that employee hurts themselves. And this goes back to an issue that took place in the mining industry and the rewriting of the criminal code and answering and adding this into the criminal code. So we went back into that and said, okay, how can we look at this from a mentoring point of view? So what we say from an IMC point, the action outcomes that we're giving to the mentor and that they become competent against them, we want to make sure that we do it so that that person, when they go to do their mentoring, they're doing it correctly. And that's a very important point for us. So the notion of it is that there is the action outcomes that are associated with this, the notion of the concepts and the practices, and just to make sure we understand is that there's the criminal code aspect of it, which is what we do to make sure that we got everything working. Anything you want to add here from a profile point of view, the process that we went through, anything like that, Doug?
No, you've covered it off.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the self-assessment aspect of it next. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, well, if you've got a profile, great. How do you know where you sit with it? Self-assess. And that's what we do when we get started, is we say to people, listen, do your self-assessment and then have a conversation with our intake manager. So what that person can do is say, okay, what's going on that allows you from a self-assessment point of view to go, okay, where do I go next, with the assistance of the intake manager. And when people do that, they find, oh, okay, that's very helpful, because they know that they've got to sort of fill in the gaps that are there, because they're not going to necessarily say, yes, I'm competent to all 79, because there's some that they might go, oh, hang on a minute, I don't really have that background. So that's going to encourage them to go to the education component of it. But what's important here is that the intake manager is really assisting you to figure out what's next. And Doug, you've done this for a couple of people already. You want to share any kind of story or any kind of background to this before I mention the ISO connection?
Well, the big thing that I find with where a lot of people kind of falter is in not having a mentoring log that they can refer to. So that's one thing. And, you know, I personally typically like to see them have anywhere between 20 to 40 hours of mentoring experience. It's just, it may sound like a lot, but at the end of the day, you're going to be drawing on those experiences as you complete your self-assessment and you fill in those gaps. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see, you know, for that. And when you do go through the self-assessment, what I will typically do as a intake manager or, you know, as a journey mentor is I will suggest perhaps the certification path that they may want to follow or that they may wish to follow based on what I'm seeing in the documentation and that they've provided in the self-assessment.
So what's happening here is we're offering you some choices as well. And we'll cover this off a little bit more under the certification, because there's 3 certificates that you can go for. What Doug is sharing, I believe, here is that sometimes we might say, hey, listen, why don't you start with this certificate and then come back after you've gotten a little bit more practice, and we can get you into the other one, because this first one will give you a little bit more grounding than what you have at this point in time. Or what we'll do is we'll say, hey, listen, let's get you going, and let's make sure that you are into it and that it makes sense for you. And this notion of journey mentor that Doug shared with you, I'll speak about that a little bit more and why we have that within the IMC. But there's this other aspect of the self-assessment, is we wanted to make sure that we brought what we were doing back against some kind of international standards and regulations. So we dug into the world of ISO, and you can certainly look this up, the standards and regulations of ISO. And we often hear 9001, that number, and that's about your base management of whatever it is that you're doing, your industry, the organization that you're working with. But also in ISO is how to run an education organization, and even to put that into your organization. Maybe you're big enough that you want to take a look at it from that perspective. There's information regulations about something called conformity assessment. We call it verification. So we dug into that as well. There's also a new standard that's just come out in recognition of mental health. And what does it mean in organizations? So we dug into that one. And it's our commitment as well, is that as we move forward, we are going to go after those ISO designations. and to be able to, again, say from a unique aspect of what it is that we do and the approach that we're using, that is something that you can count on, and we're bringing it back against the international standards, because then that means international mentoring community, it is truly international, and we're opening up what we're doing for the world. And I think that sort of covers off that part, Doug. We'll move on to the next one.
Yep.
Okay, so what we're going to take a look at now is the world of education, this idea of filling in the gaps. If you remember from the self-assessment, is that you do the self-assessment and you're going, well, I don't have all of them. And with your conversation with the intake manager, they're going to say, well, how are you going to fill those gaps? And that becomes important. And what we offer to people is that we have a library that you tap into, but we also acknowledge is that you can go elsewhere and learn from other people ways to fill in those gaps. We're not saying is that you must, like, it's not mandatory that you go into the library. It's a great library. There's lots of really wonderful videos and handouts and all that that are available that we've collected over time. And we continue to share with you on a Wednesday morning when we do our mentoring lounge. And we put those into the library as well. And Doug does a lot of podcasts at the moment, so we'll be adding those into the library as well. But there's a couple of things here that I would bring to your attention. One has already been mentioned, and that's the notion of the log, and that is important, but also is to start creating what's called a portfolio. So your log is part of that portfolio, is because the log is keeping track of what you have been doing and interacting with mentees, and what your learning is. Their portfolio might include things you may have created, a handout that you have used, and you want to be able to share it with us, and you can put it into that portfolio as well. But also this portfolio is what is the documents that are necessary that you collect through the mentoring certification process that you submit when we go into the next topic, which is the verification. But I believe that I truly believe that it's important to understand the following, and it's sort of digging down a little deeper into this one from an education point of view. And that's to take a look at, there is what's called evidence, okay, EVB learning, evidence-based learning. That's what the portfolio, that's what the log is about, is providing evidence, all right, has a little bit more of a mechanical, scientific aspect to it, right? While some of that might be stories that you collect and testimonials, it's also your deeper reflections. What is it that is really being said to yourself? What are people saying to you? And deepen and deepen and deepen. And that's the evidence that you're bringing forward. And it's balancing it against what we call the evidence-based educating, which is what you're going to get to do as you move forward with mentoring. But it's also how we interact with you is an experience-based educating approach. And when we get into verification, I think you'll get a flavor of this. How am I doing from the education story point of view? Anything you want to add here, Doug?
No, I think you've definitely addressed it.
Okay. So I think what we'll do then is we'll get into the world of the verification. And this is when you submit your portfolio, submit your application. And that's why the journey mentor that Doug shared with you, you may take the option and say, I'd like to have someone on the journey with me who is a mentor, understands about mentoring, and we provide that service as well. And we're also looking for those who go through IMC's process, is to become a journey mentor to help other mentors in the community. And that is something that you can aspire to as you get involved in IMC. But the verification component here, think about it from this point of view. It's a confirmation that you have yes to all the action outcome statements. When you're back doing your self-assessment, you're going to probably get yes and no's, because there's no maybes with the question that we ask. So if it's a waffly yes, that's a no. So it's no, yes. And what you're doing is turning your no's into yeses, so that when you submit your portfolio, your evidence, you get into the verification, what we're doing is confirming that the concepts and practices of the action outcomes that you're working with, we can say, yes, we can confirm. You know that, you can do that. And that becomes really important, because that's what the certification links against. Now, there's something here that I should share, is there are 3 certificates that are available. And then there is a 4th. So of the 3 certificates, there's a certificate of competence mentor. That is the one, it's the baseline. That's when you get the whole story of knowledge, skills, and attitude. You're confirmed as competent against that profile. So that's the certificate of competence mentor. Now, we mentioned earlier is that there's some other certificates, which is depending on where you are in your journey, and the intake manager might say, hey, why don't you start with a certificate of recognition, which is, here's 30 of the base competence elements, action outcome statements that would be great for you to start with, and give yourself some breathing space before you jump into the other ones. But there is the certificate of achievement, and that's one for those who might go, I really want to understand the concepts of mentoring because of the work that I'm doing. Maybe I'm a leader and I want to make sure that I understand those concepts. And they might go, I'll just do that one. And maybe later, once I build up my evidence, my portfolio, my log, I might come back and actually do the certificate of competence mentor. So what I'm sharing with you in a sense is that you have your recognition, which is nested inside of your achievement, which is nested inside your competence. So you can work on the 3, or you say, well, maybe I might start with the achievement, go to competence. I can start at competence. Depends where it is that you want to go. So that's the role of the intake manager before you do your self-assessment, to make sure you get the correct profile and to be able to work through it from there. Now, what's an important element here is that you notice that it says verification. Well, what we do is we also use a technique called audit. So there is a verbal audit with a certificate of recognition. There is a written audit with a certificate of achievement, and the verification is done with the certificate of competence. And what that does is it gives us a way in which to figure out what's the best way, what you know and or can do, doing mentoring. Now, this 4th one, I just wanted to bring to your attention. We've mentioned it already, Journey Mentor. The certificate of competence mentor is a prerequisite for the Journey Mentor. And the Journey Mentor is one where we certainly get into it deeper, and we get into concepts where you truly understand the importance of mental health and the well-being of the mentee, but it also where we'll cover topics like diversity and inclusion and really bring those to the surface. And what does that mean? We cover them off in the base, but we want to get into them a little bit more. And so the Journey Mentor is one that's available to assist the mentors who are coming through the process. But to Doug's point of mental health, and I'll have him explain a little bit more, the Journey Mentor, we believe, is a very valuable contribution into the mental health area, and the mental health issues that are unfolding in the community as we move forward. Do you want to share a little bit more about that, Doug?
Yeah, I certainly can. So the journey mentor, as you've laid out, is one of the functions that they perform is to sort of to help individuals navigate through the certification process. So a large part of that is helping them get prepared for the verification interview that they have to go through. And just so our listeners are not misguided by anything, I want them to know that in my particular case, I went through the verification interview and it was approximately 2 hours in duration. So not that that is intended to scare you, but what it is to let you know how structured and how serious the certification of mentors is to us and to the international mentoring community. So the other part is the aspect of the Journey Mentor was largely created to help fill a void in the support structure for mental health. So what we saw with the research and stuff that we did was that there was a gap as far as the support for individuals who are dealing with mental health challenges. And we felt that somebody who has training, i.e. the Journey Mentor, would be in a good place, a good position to be able to offer that or provide that support. And in some cases, it's as simple as being able to be an active listener. So somebody who can listen and hear what the person they're working with is actually saying and knowing sort of the course of action that you may want to suggest and stuff like that. So that's kind of sort of a real high level overview of the Journey Mentor and what's involved. I know today I'm doing a lot of work in that space. And in fact, what I'm finding is that asking the right questions helps open the door to allow people who are in fact struggling with mental health challenges. It's helping them open that door to be able to step out of their closet, as I call it, and ask for help. And without that Journey Mentor in place, that may not take place.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that, because it's important, and that's the deep practice that Doug is certainly doing out there with the Journey Mentor. So let's take a look at this idea of certification and what's important here. So the notion of being able to verify someone, all right, what we're looking at is, are you competent to the knowledge, skills, and attitude of serving as a mentor? But there's also the certification where what we do is we audit, and it has a little bit less notion of competence, more about, do you have the knowledge, and are you aware of the base skills that needs to happen and what attitude it requires? But it doesn't mean that what we're looking at from an audit verification, that those are equivalent. And I just wanted to make sure that we bring that to the surface. But really what's happening here with certification, this is the sort of like, oh, okay, here's the ceremony time, we made it. And for those who want a parchment paper kind of idea, we have that. Or if you prefer it as an image, we have that. And a person can grab that and say, I have gone through it, and this is what I have achieved, and that I can share. And Doug mentioned this very early on in the video, is that when he said that he was certified as a mentor, in this case, as a competent mentor, it made the difference for the group who are going to hire him and get themselves involved with him, to go, oh, I think you've stepped it up quite a bit. In other words, you've deepened and enriched your world. So that is the importance of the certification once you get there. And the other thing that I would mention here is that with the competence side, okay, what we have to do is remember that there is recertification. Because things shift, and to stay competent in it, to be able to maintain your log, to maintain your evidence, we say that every 2 years you come back and you recertify. That's not mandatory. Again, go back to mandatory. It's not mandatory. Applicability, I think we can make a case for that one, is to have the person come back. So I wanted to acknowledge is that the certification for the audit of recognition and achievement, there's no recert. It's a recert for the certificate of competence mentor and the certificate of competence journey mentor. That's where you will get the recert. And I think that sort of covers off the certification aspect of it. Doug, you want to add anything there?
No, well, actually, I do, because it's extremely important that our listeners understand the significance of the recertification and how important that is to do that every 2 years, because the mentoring landscape is changing as we speak. And in order for people to continue to provide that deeper, richer mentoring experience, you need to stay on top of all the changes that are taking place. And I know I'm in the process of writing my second book, and the research that I've had to do because of that has unearthed some different techniques and approaches that I'm going to be able to use in my practice in order to be able to provide that deeper, richer mentoring experience for the person I'm working with. So as much as you go and say, geez, I hate the idea of having to go through this all again, trust me, it's well worth the journey, and it's a journey that, I strongly encourage you to take.
And that's one of the reasons we created the library as well, so that we could provide these insights that are of support. So Doug's books, right, and some of his handouts and that are in the library. Some of mine are in there. We're actually creating a book and a signature course that someone can go through to get themselves involved in the world of mentoring. It's a baseline course. Some people have been asking for it, so we thought that we would actually create it. And obviously these mentoring lounge live broadcasts that we do, they are in the YouTube channel for the International Mentoring Community. You can go in and watch them there. They're in the blog on the website, which is internationalmentoringcommunity.com. So we're attempting to provide as much as we can. But again, I just want to acknowledge is that we're not the only source of the education material. You can go and get it from others, but when you do your self-assessment and learn the action outcome statements, and when you go to do the verification, let the education, what it is that you've come to know and do, and the attitudes that you have brought forward, they have to link into the verification that's going to take place. But we're not saying is that in our videos, we may use a certain language like pre, during, post. And when we look at a mentoring, it's not that you must adopt that. You might say before, during, and after, right? Or whatever other language that you might use. So long as you have the sense, and we have the sense when we do the verification, okay, we can play with that, because we know words are important, and maybe those words versus the words that we might use might be slightly different, but we make sure that we define them and we agree that we're coming out of the same songbook, if I use that metaphor. So I think what will be helpful here, Doug, is start looking at summing things up. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So what we have now is to just go back and say, hey, listen, we did the explanation of the profile, and that's sort of the same point for us. That's the action outcomes statements that we use, so that what you can do is do a self-assessment against them. And what we've done from this action outcome is try to bring the best of what we've learned from what other people are doing, and what they're suggesting are the action outcomes. The self-assessment gets you to a point of figuring out where you might go, I don't quite know if I know that one. I couldn't consider myself competent to that action outcome statement. Therefore, go get your education, concepts and practices, get your knowledge, skills, and attitude up. So that what you can do is start to get your logbook put together, your portfolio put together, so that when you apply for your verification and you go through the verification or audit, if you're wanting to take the certificate of achievement or certificate of recognition, the verification if you're doing a certificate of competence. And then if all works out and you complete everything, then we can say that we can give you the certification, and to remember that there is the recertification that goes with the certificate of competence mentor. And also what I wanted to do is just bring back to the foreground is, this is why from a very quick point of view, you're connecting to the profile so that you can consider through your self-assessment where you sit. You're going to do this conversion. I've got to convert my knowledge, skills, and attitude into what is necessary, or I've got to go learn that. That's the education. So that what I can do is I can conclude that, yes, I've got everything I need, and that the persons who are doing the verification can conclude that I'm competent, and therefore I've completed the process and I get awarded the certificate that I have gone after. And that's why the 5 C's are so important to what's unfolding. So with that, Doug, I think that what we can do is we can say we've covered off mentoring certification, the base pathway, using those 5 pillars, tenets, whatever you want to call them. People use different names. We talk about the 5 essentials. That's the language that we use. So with that, Doug, anything you want to add about our presentation before I get you to do the conclusion? Anything? Is there anything based on your experience that you would really want to emphasize for someone who may be starting into the world of mentoring and getting involved with IMC? And then I'm going to ask you about someone who has been mentoring. Okay. So what about someone starting new? What would you suggest to them based on what we've shared?
Start your mentoring log today.
That's a wise practice. What about someone who has been involved in mentoring and looking at getting their certification? What would you suggest to them?
You know, to take advantage of the, and I'll you know, to take advantage of the journey mentor to walk beside you through that you know, that journey that you're about to go on to become certified competent as a mentor. I think it's time and money well spent in order to be able to go through that. And that's certainly what I'm seeing from a lot of people, is that those that have started their journey are, you know, are always asking questions, and those questions we can answer most definitely through the journey mentor process.
Yeah, so what that does is it brings us back to the point of mentoring is what it is that we're taking a look at from a certification point of view. Is it mandatory? There's no one out there who is saying it is a must. But I think some of the stories that we've shared, there are employers, there are organizations saying, what do you have that convinces us that you know how to mentor? Mm-hmm. And if you can say, well, I have a certification from the International Mentoring Community, and this is what I have to do vis-a-vis the story that Doug shared, that's great, because it has a great application, not only your own personal development, both personally and professionally, and advancing and deepening and enriching your own mentoring approach, but it also helps to establish a community in which we can deepen and enrich this educating approach that I think is gaining importance and significance for the world. One area in particular Doug mentioned is in the mental health area. I believe also it's very important for those who are involved in nature informed businesses, using mentoring to guide people in a deeper, richer relationship with nature. And I'll be speaking about that one a little bit later as we go along. So I think, Doug, I'm going to ask you to do our usual out. All right, our outbound, which is what I always jokingly say is I do the introduction, Doug gets to take us out. But just before we do that, please subscribe. We would so appreciate that. And giving out the website, internationalmentoringcommunity.com, and certainly come over and visit. And please get a hold of us and get a hold of the intake manager. Let's get you started along the process of becoming a mentor. Over to you, Doug. I'll let you take us out at this point in time.
And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but start your mentoring log today.
And with that, folks, take care.